Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In question 28 of the first part of the second part of his Summa Theologiae, Thomas Aquinas is first going to consider one particular effect of love that he thinks is really centrally important. And it's one that we often do attribute to the workings of love, whether we understand it as an action or as an emotion or as something else. And it's union, unio in Latin. And so the question is union itself an effect of love? And as always, he begins by considering some arguments against that idea, which he's going to reject, these arguments. So objection number one is, it seems union is not an effect of love. Why? Well, because absence is incompatible with union. Now notice, this is in the abstract. If things are absent from each other, of course, they can't be united. And he says, but love is indeed compatible with absence. So if you can love and not have the thing that you love right there, you don't have a union. And so therefore, union is not an effect of love, in part because you can have this incompatible factor mixed in. The second one is a little bit more complicated. And Thomas's approach to this is also going to be more complicated. He says, every union is one of two types. It's either according to essence. So what are examples of that? Well, very metaphysical things. Form is united to matter, right? Accident to subject, a part to a whole, or another part in order to make up the whole. These are very big metaphysical things. Or it's according to likeness in genus, species, or accident. What does that mean? So they resemble each other, the two things that are united by being part of the same genus. For example, we and our pet animals like cats and dogs are all animals, so we're united in that respect. Species, we're united with other human beings by being the same kind of thing. Accident would be things that are more specific and less essential to us. So I could be united in my love of 1970s and 1980s heavy metal with other fellow metalheads, and that would be an accident from Thomas's perspective. So we've got these two distinctions in place. He says love doesn't cause union of essence, because otherwise you couldn't be between things that are essentially distinct. And it also doesn't cause union of likeness, but rather is caused by it. And here he's going to refer us back to a previous discussion in the preceding question. So union is not an effect of love. So once again, we get to the same conclusion. And then he's going to bring up what we might call an epistemological argument. And this depends a little bit on Aristotelian and Thomist philosophy insofar as it has to do with knowledge. So he says the sense in act is the sensible in act, and the intellect in act is the thing actually understood. So there's this idea that when you grasp something, when you apprehend it, you are actually, in a way, taking it into yourself. There's a kind of union going on there. And he says the lover in act is not the beloved in act. You love something else, right? So union is an effect of knowledge, great, but it's not an effect of love. So we're going to see that's kind of a weak argument that's being made there. And then he brings up, on the contrary, he cites pseudo-Dionysius. Every love is a unitive love. Okay, that's not actually providing much of an argument there. Thomas is going to say, okay, how do we make sense of this? So he does what he often does, makes a distinction and says the union between the lover and the loved, the beloved, is twofold, the two types, right? The first is going to be what we translate as real union, secundum rem. So we call it real because it's about the matter or thing itself. It's in accordance with the thing itself. And this happens when the beloved is actually present with the lover. Okay, that does happen sometimes, right? Think about a marriage where we're celebrating the love between two people. They're not doing it remotely by letters, right? They're there in the same room, so they are there together. And I suppose when they're consummating the marriage, right, exhibiting what the medievals would call conjugal love, they better both be there present to each other. It's not going to be over the phone or by Skype or Zoom or anything like that. Obviously, that didn't exist in medieval times. So that's one key thing. And then he says the second is what we call union of affection. And this, he says, has to be considered in relation to preceding apprehension, how we grasp the other person. Why? Because the movement of the appetite, the will, and the passions in love follows grasping the thing that we love or the person who we love. And then he's going to talk about, he's going to make another distinction that we should be familiar with by now between love of concupiscence, right, or it's sometimes called love of desire, and love of friendship. Each of these, he says, arises by a kind of apprehension of oneness or unity of the thing that is loved, the thing that we're directing love to with the lover. So how does this happen? Well, with love of concupiscence or desire, when we love a thing, we're desiring it, we apprehend it as belonging to our well-being. We could be wrong about that. So if I love somebody who's, sexually attractive but is actually terrible for me because they're what we call a toxic personality, okay, I have love of concupiscence, but it's, based on incorrect apprehensions. But it still extends desire out to them, and it's seeking a kind of unity to them, because I think that's going to be good for me. I'm just mistaken. And then he says, in a like manner, when we love another person with a love of friendship, what are we doing? We will good to that other person just as we will good to ourselves. So it's a different kind of love. Why do we do that? Because we apprehend that other person as being another self, somebody like us, so somebody worth what we would give to ourselves. And, he brings up Augustine and Aristotle and other people who talk about the friend being half of our soul or the other self. And then he also says another interesting thing. So the first kind of union, real union, he says, is caused effectively by love. So love brings about this union. Why? Because you want to be with the person that you love, right? You want them to be present, and you want to be present to them. The second is caused, as he says, formally by love. Love itself is this union or bond. And he brings up Augustine, saying that love is a vital principle uniting or seeking to unite two together, the lover and the beloved. And he says, describing it as uniting, he refers to the union of affection, without which there's no love. And in saying it seeks to unite it, he refers to real union. So, this explains how there can be union as not just characteristic of love, but as what love produces, its effect. Now, considering the previous arguments, the reply to objection 1 is pretty straightforward. He says, well, you're partly right. It applies to real union. This argument works for that. And he says that it's necessary to pleasure being its cause. Desire implies the real absence of the beloved. But we don't say that somebody stops loving when their beloved isn't there, right? They feel desire. And it could be desire of concupiscence. It could even be desire of friendship. They want good things for them, but their friend is in a rough patch and they can't do much for them. So it's saying, the argument, you're trying to claim too much. Now, the second one, as I pointed out before, there's a lot more going on here. He says that we can distinguish between 3 ways in which union is connected with love. So this is actually kind of an interesting advancing of the idea. We've got union that causes love, union that is an effect of love, right? So these are kind of reciprocal. And then union that is essentially love itself, a third one. And he's going to treat each of these in turn. He says union which causes love is substantial union if it's the love that we have for ourselves. So, we are with ourselves. We substantially love ourselves. Or it can be the love of likeness if it's loving another kind of thing, right? So that causes love on our part. That's not a union that's an effect of love, although it could be the effect of a previous love. Then he goes on and he says there's a union which is essentially love itself. What is this? Well, this is according to a bond of affection and is similar to substantial union, inasmuch as the lover stands to the object of love as to himself. If it be love of friendship as to something belonging to himself, or if it be love of friendship, rather, and is something belonging to himself if it be love of concupiscence. So that's when you actually have, or at least in imagination or projection, have the thing that you want. And then he goes on and says, what about the union that's an effect of love? Which is really what we're talking about here. This is real union, which the lover seeks with the object of his love. So it's something that makes us go out and try to get the thing that we love. And he says this is in keeping with the demands of love. He brings up Aristotle talking about Aristophanes' famous story in the Symposium, saying that lovers would like to be united in one, but they can't do that. So what do? They seek out a suitable union to live together, speak together, and be united together. And that's how love looks for them. The final bit of this, the reply to the third. Okay, so remember what Thomas was saying people might object is that union is an effect of knowledge. Our minds are united with their objects, but it's not something that happens with love. Thomas is actually going to say, you've got it backwards. So the effect of love is that the thing itself, which is loved, is in a way united to the lover. And then he says, as stated above. What does that mean? All of the things that we've discussed earlier in this particular article. He's gone through ways in which we are united in loving with the thing that we love. And here's the kicker. That union is actually, could be translated as closer, which is a bit of an anemic translation because the Latin is actually magis, more greatly, right? Unitivus, united, or of the sort of thing to be united, than the union that's caused by knowledge. And this is pretty characteristic, not just of Thomas, but of a lot of Christian authors in general. There's something in loving, even though it's not essentially a cognitive act, it's affective, that is more powerful in uniting than the knowledge that we have, which also involves union. So, clearly, Thomas thinks that, yes, union is an effect, at least in some cases, of the love, the various kinds of love that we human beings feel.